Hello, everybody. Welcome to ICSB, and great honor to present a workshop here. And one of the things that's become a very important question for us and for others is we're going to have to start assessing the impact of entrepreneurship education and training. This is already happening in other places, but in North America and Asia, this is coming, and it's coming faster than you think. And one great thing about impact is that it is essential to understand what is to fulfill our promises that we have made explicitly or implicitly to our learners. Another great thing is we've got some great models, particularly from the UK and the EU, and we've got great tools that you're all going to share about. I'm very excited. This will be my next slide, whatever. Next slide, please. Our distinguished panel here. Normally, that when we do these talks, we use Mentimeter. So our secret weapon is actually Jonas, the guy who invented Mentimeter. Just wanted to see if anybody actually had any idea who he is. So Andy tells me that Mentimeter is not our secret weapon. What is our secret weapon, Andy?
Norris, our secret weapon is, of course, our alumni who we can learn from.
And that is something that you're going to enjoy this presentation. You're going to see lots of neat new things that we're going to do, that we are learning to do. And that's just one of the powerful insights we have. Next slide, please. I've been on a tear lately, is thinking about what is it that we owe our entrepreneurial learners, that basically have a manifesto of sorts, that every entrepreneurship learner that we're dealing with, they deserve the best pedagogy for them, the best educators, the best trained educators. We have, what are the best settings for that class? The best entrepreneurship education ecosystem to support all this. We need the best research and the best assessment, last but not least. There's a link there. Would love your feedback on that. So next slide. One of the things that got this going, and this is where Andy Penaluna and I first met in person, was in Potsdam for Entrepreneurship 360 under the HE Innovate initiative. And one of the things we noticed, 26 case studies of great primary and secondary education programs in entrepreneurship. And I tell you, it's getting even better, as Andy will talk about. But there were 4 things at least that every one of the 26 had in common. First one was they were deeply co-immersed with the entrepreneurial community. They were not only out in the community, they were bringing the community in. Most of the exercises were student-led. In fact, many of them were student-designed, even for primary students. I mean, think about, let that sink in. Student designed by a second grader, and it works. There was rigorous regular evaluation that, as any good educator would do, they're always trying to see, have we moved the needle in the direction that we had hoped? And not coincidentally, the third part of this presentation will be about a great new tool from HE Innovate called EPIC that Gabi Kopka will talk about. The other thing that is, the last thing is, and this is a tough one to swallow for many entrepreneurship professors, is that you have a professional educator leading the effort. And having someone who is professionally trained in the theory and practice of education are vanishingly rare in entrepreneurship education. And frankly, people are quite hostile to that notion. I get great teaching evaluations. Okay, whatever. Next. So, quick preview over there. If a tree falls, did we hear it? If we've made an impact on our students, how would we know? We're going to get at why assessment is important. What are people already doing, and what will attendees get to stay home? Next slide. Now, normally we would be doing this by Mentimeter, but there's a Google form here. Don't worry, we'll come back and you'll get that link again. But if you want to pause the video right now and bookmark that, please do. That will make it easier. This is an example. Another project involved is by looking at why have the Netherlands been so successful, and they've done a great job of sort of the same kind of principle of getting this co-immersion with the entrepreneurial community, best teaching, not just best teaching methods, but best educator learning methods. A lot of needs up. I recommend this. If you are an OECD, in an OECD country, you should bug your policymakers to commission a study like this. And maybe you'll see Gabi and Andy and I in your country. Next slide. I don't want to miss the opportunity to say this is really important. There are huge risks to going forward, that if you're going to assess your impact, you may not like what you get. On the other hand, if you get out in front of this and make it a learning experience, the opportunities are huge. We've learned this year that this is the direction the accrediting body for business schools is going. The ACSB is demanding universities that business schools demonstrate impact on the community and impact on their students. And it's only a matter of time till they push forward. And once they see, if they see Andy's slides you're about to get, that could get accelerated. So we need to be there. And also we're finding globally that if you can demonstrate any kind of impact, it is a good thing for your budget. That with things getting tighter and tighter under COVID, this is really important. Your stakeholders understand vanity metrics. They know them when they see them. So let's avoid vanity metrics. Let's get real about that. The other thing too, this is a way to develop and increase your legitimacy in the community. How many programs in the university are actually doing this kind of real assessment? That it's a differentiator and a legitimizer, I think of great import. And also it just using these tools is a way for you to develop. This is not to be punitive. These tools are to make you better and make your learners better. Next slide. You guys have seen me throw this slide up many a time, but for someone they're starting out to think more like a beginner, and you want to move them to thinking more like an expert. There have these learning experiences, these transformational experiences we call critical developmental experiences, that both incrementally and in large chunks change not just what we know, but how we know it. That we're changing. Transformational learning requires deep cognitive change, and any school teacher can tell you that. And I think intuitively we all know that, but we haven't really talked about it. But think about chess. A good player versus a master. A chess master sees the board differently than and even a very good player. They see their opponent differently. They see the game differently. Grandmaster sees the board differently, sees the opponent differently, sees the game differently. And this is true in many, many professions. And it's just as true for entrepreneurship as anything else. Next. Now, I'm going to just skip over this, but that lesson plans is an easy experiment to get started on. Next slide. So what are you going to assess? What's that impact look like? And one of the things that came out of this EPIC project that Gabi is going to wax eloquent on is knowledge content. How much do you know? How you go through a training, what do you know more that you didn't before? That one's hard to do rigorously. It's messy. Skills is something that we can do measurement, and Entrecomp has done a great job of helping us. But knowing stuff, knowing how to do stuff are very different things. Mindset is, we talk about the entrepreneurial mindset. We never really define it, let alone measure it. There's a lot of crap, mediocrity out there that is pointing at, but we have ways to do that, and that's in the EPIC tool. And changing how they behave. There are a lot of behaviors out there that are entrepreneurial that we're inducing. Maybe they don't start a business, but they go to work for somebody else's venture. We need to be able to capture that. And finally, one thing that we learned from at IEC that was that your external stakeholders have met their metrics they want to hear, and we ignore them at our peril. Next slide. Again, we have another, that at some point you are going to pause the video and bookmark this to get back to later. But if we had Mentimeter, we'd have that, and we'd have some discussion of that. Next slide. In terms of the outputs, we're going to go very, very quickly. There are some things we can do to improve our understanding of changes in what they know. Entrecomp got a great tool for skills. Next slide. Mindset. I have an instrument that I would love to share with you that is a bit longer than we like, but I think you would find it very useful. But there's a very simple one. Getting at, in terms of mindset, the role identity. Do you see yourself as an entrepreneur? You ask students, ask learners, draw me an entrepreneur, and often they draw very inaccurate pictures. And worse, the entrepreneur doesn't look like them. But in terms of a pre and post, I found this really amazing that even if the changes in this drawing are subtle from between pre and post, they're powerful. They're more accurate. They're more self-inclusive. Next slide. Now here are the mindset. Let's not worry about those. Next slide. You will want to come back and look at those. What are the behaviors? You'll see those are covered nicely in EPIC. And what do your stakeholders want? And just as Andy said early on, is if you want to understand your impact, asking the alumni of your programs to reflect back after, whether it's a year or 10 years, what they've done, but they can also give you great insight into what kind of impact you should be looking at. Next slide. Now, if you're going to analyze the impact of something, that the education researchers point out that you can't just say, okay, there was this pedagogy versus that pedagogy, and they had differential results. But you have to also, as a covariate at least, the characteristics of the student, and particularly the characteristics of the instructor. A bad pedagogy and a great teacher might outperform a great pedagogy and a crappy teacher. That's something that's very, very important. Not just that, the assessment itself, to the degree that it is intrusive, may actually influence the outcome, but that's also could be used as a, as a learning tool. Next slide. Anyway, what you really came for, Andy Pinaluna, who is, if there's anybody who knows more about the state of assessment of entrepreneurship education and what is out there and what is coming down the road. I am so excited because this is one of my heroes, and he has no idea how much of his stuff I steal on a regular basis. So Andy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Norris. What an entry. Can we have a little picture of me a few years ago in the Netherlands, would you believe? And just going to have a little look at where things are from where I sit at the moment. So if we can have the next slide, please, Gabby. You may have heard of the UK Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education. You may also have heard of Advanced HE, or under its earlier name, the Higher Education Academy. QA are responsible for assuring academic quality, and I fortunately chair that part of the organization. And so I'm working with all UK universities and universities overseas that work to UK systems. Same goes with advanced HE, but that's more about the evaluating the teacher as a learner, the educator as a learner. How can we bring those along? So there's a couple of my jobs that help to sort of situate where I am. And you may notice in the picture there that it's truly an international thing, because we're working with the EU Joint Research Centre, the lady on the left of me, and United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and that's the lady to the right of me as you look at the picture. So, you know, we're listening as well and learning as well. So we can have the next slide, please. I just want to actually start by introducing the way that the UK views assessment and why we split enterprise and entrepreneurship. The terms and names are less important than the split, because if we are assessing novelty, creativity, originality, initiative, we don't know the end result. It takes a different assessment type than if we were defining something that we know the answer to. So entrepreneurship could be used to assess, you know, how much you turn over, how well you can write a cost review, things like that. So they require quite different types of assessment. There's a link down there if you want to learn more, but I do have one or more, two more pictures to help you there. So if you could just click, please, Gabby. What we see is an overarching term of entrepreneurial education. And of course, we see macro level success as being startup. However, there's more to it than that. So if we think about the enterprise side being the broad competencies and soft skills, the narrow startup and the business training can be seen in the entrepreneurship. But if you can click again for me, Gabby, of course, they can lead to entrepreneurship and employability. So either of those paths, we take that into account. And where would the good entrepreneurs be without the good people to work with them? So that's a question that led us to really think about having the entrepreneurial people who may later become entrepreneurs themselves, but can still add to the ecosystem. So if you can click again for me, please. To the left, in enterprise education, this is broadly speaking the innovation assessment. Best results will include surprises. So you can't go writing outcomes to measure against. They just don't exist. But you can look at the process. And if we look to the other side and click again, please, Gabby. This is more what we call implementation assessment, the type of assessment that you can measure. As I mentioned before, a business plan or something like that. But all of this is situated. So if you can click for me again, please, Gabby. At the Quality Assurance Agency, we soon became aware that we could be talking about business school enthusiasts who already have a very good business idea can take forward, and they jump straight into that entrepreneurship education approach. We also realized that there's a lot of people who don't know much about it yet and really in their own inner world and need to move out. As we move through that triangle, we lead to that gateway, which is the self-led negotiated action. And that's what we think is key. So below the line, we've got any learner from any subject area, and that's going to be very important, as I'll explain afterwards. We have this risk openness, whereas in entrepreneurship education, maybe when there's lots of money or the relationship between your university and a business is at stake, that failure limitation will be pretty apparent. So we can see through that the situation and the context is very important when we come to assessment. If you can click again, please, Gabby. So you may have that, I've got a great idea, and we can start with entrepreneurship and startup. If you can click again, please, Gabby. There's a few coming now. So we can start with value creation. If actually we need a challenge, you look to what the needs are, but be aware of the old Henry Ford thing of if I asked them what they needed, they would have said faster horses. And if we can click it down again, please. So innovative problem solvers are at the base of this, and that's where we're developing, dare I say, imagination and creative capacity. Of course, we get to the top of the scale with another click. And whenever anything changes, guess what happens? So click again, please, Gabby. Yes, of course, the time you've got to get pivoting is when you start to think creatively and innovatively, because things have changed. And boy, are we in that situation right now. So if you click for me again, please, Gabby. You'll see those split into the enterprise and entrepreneurship zones. So could we click again? Now, when you start to look at who's good at these things, if we look beyond the business school, well, yes, the great idea we want to test, business and management and science are very good at this. If we want to start to think about pivoting, go have a look at music, go listen to some jazz and find out how those people are taught and how they're helped to develop. A challenge to get to thinking, performing arts, sports are incredibly good at this. Humanities, working with incomplete evidence in history education. So these are the sort of things brought into play. And again, the innovative problem solver, perhaps typically the art and design, but in medicine too. So when you look at what these people do in all of the subjects, and we see the university as a true ecosystem, then we've got lots to draw upon. You can click for me again, please, Gabby. So what happens when we start taking this down a level? What happens when we start to think about schooling and the preparedness of bringing young people into an entrepreneurial ecosystem? Well, I'm sharing with you here, just small, you can go and have a look at this, just type in North Macedonia and you'll find their schooling system. And in there, you'll find that each year has got an aim and it steps it up. The first one is simply, who am I? Who is an entrepreneur? Then you start to think about context more and in a social environment initially to understand how you create value. Step it up again and it's got the experience of actually creating a business. Look at the age group there. At secondary school, of course, we can follow this on when we start to apply our entrepreneurial management skills with other people. And by the end of it, you find that the students apply all the prior learning to develop a company. And by the way, they also teach younger students. So if we can click to the next slide, please. Just very briefly, here's what's happening in Wales in schooling. Notice there's enterprising creative contributors, but actually ambitious, capable learners, healthy, confident individuals, and ethically informed citizens. They could all sit under the entrepreneurial banner. And just to give you a tiny flavor, if you can click, please. At the top, we've got teachers teaching each other using the Entrecomp framework I'll mention in a moment. And at the bottom, this was literally yesterday when one of our government officials was being told what it means to be resilient by young children talking about the poor spider caught in the rain. And so, this is really a starting point. Just look at the size of those kids. So if we can click again, please. Of course, kids can be pretty creative. We've got a thing in Europe called Entrecomp Edu. And in some cases, that means us learning from the kids. So in this case here, we've actually got an evidence example, as it were, of teachers being taught by school children who've attended the entrepreneurial courses. So they feed back to the next generation of teachers. So that's already happening. We can click again, please. So we have to ask what we're assessing, and this just gives a little flavor of that. Are we looking at short, medium, or long-term on learner performance? But what about that educator performance? Are we giving clear goals, or is it a general intent? What does that mean? What's the difference? Who sets the criteria? The alumni, a favorite of mine, but also, of course, enterprising businesses and entrepreneurs themselves. That will also be impacted on the context, as Norris said. So are these grades formative? They're helping them forward? Or are they, giving them a concluding grade? What type of assessment? Is it the innovation or the implementation? So we can move on and on, but that gives a little flavor. So if you can click again for me, please. Then we have to think about terming and fitting these things in. Is it end of module or short term? This might actually give us limited insights, but it's quick, clean, easy to do. Medium term, well, maybe this is the summative results of a whole course or program and can be seen as an end goal in itself, and then it shuts down. And what we're really recommending here today is this long-term, real insights, tracking alumni, working with institutional support, and getting all the needs and the resources right so that the university can actually follow the progress of alumni and learn from them, and they feed back into the system. So another click, please. So the goals, well, is it a clear goal based on a clear definitional stance, which is great for us academics? It gives us something to research and measure, but it does offer limited insights based on our predicted outcomes as educators? Is there a general aim or intent? Well, that allows for variance and interpretation, but it makes the measurement difficult. Is it subject-based, which is very real and relevant to the learner? But if you are teaching archaeology students, for example, and you come from a business school, be prepared to find out what they already know and what they already do, and try and tie that in. So that gives you the subject relevance that you're looking for. If it is entrepreneurship based as opposed to subject based, typically from the business school, you get the specialist insights, but you may lack that relevance to the learner, which will also impact on how they perform. So next slide, please. We feel that we need critical synthesis as well as critical analysis. We also hear this term so often, critical analysis, but what are the synthesis? What do you do as an educator to join things together? Here's Professor David Gibson, OBE, with a couple of my students. And on the wall behind you, you've got their thinking. What he's really doing is not looking at their final result, but the way that they've thought about how they're getting there. Both of these students went on to be successful entrepreneurs. So this critical synthesis, being able to join together things I'm talking about today, is probably most helpful. So if we can click again, please, Gabby. When we were working with the QAA, we were invited to join a European project called Entrecomp. Now, Entrecomp has got this 15 competencies that you can see here. The link is there. So you can actually see how people develop on spotting opportunities, on being creative, on how they can vision futures, how they can work in teams, how they become ethical. But all of these 15 dimensions have a common core, that they, in terms of progression, offer increasing autonomy, working in increasingly uncertain environments, in increasing complexity, increasing novelty, and increasing self-regulation. So that brings the discussion from pedagogy, perhaps into andragogy and heutagogy, where students actually direct their own learning. So one more click, please. Just sharing a couple of things with you. If you want to know about starting from the subject rather than starting from the business school, have a look at the one in the middle there, the ETC toolkit, where you'll find many examples. And they're tied into the UK QAA and are now being tied into Entrecomp as well. So the QA documents on the left, the learner as a teacher developments on the right. And we've also got a body called Enterprise Educators UK, who lead the IEC conference that Norris mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of UK resources out there and they've fed into many things. So let's hear the story. Let's move on. Gabby, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you, Norris. It is such a pleasure and honor to be here. Well, that picture is quite some years old, but I still feel the same. Lots of wonder for the world. But of course, since then, some things have happened. And one is that I had the honor to be a project leader for the EPIC toolkit development. The EPIC toolkit is one of the instruments that is offered free of charge and readily available for everyone who wants to use it via the website of HE Innovate. And EPIC really tried to leverage the knowledge and experience of a lot of great entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial educators. Andy and Norris were among them. But they brought with them many friends who have played an extremely valuable role in realizing the EPIC instrument. Now, before I tell you more about EPIC, here's one more Mentimeter question. Again, we have some issues with making Mentimeter asynchronous. So here, Norris again has provided a convenient link to Google Docs form where you can fill in that question. And again, we will share our answers with you. So EPIC, it was quite a journey indeed. It started with the European Commission's call for a consortium that would assess the state of the art of entrepreneurship education program assessment in higher education. And as said, I had the honor to be the project leader of that consortium. And you can see all the partners on the bottom of the screen. And this project indeed had the goal of coming with a toolkit that would help to assess the impact, the outcomes of entrepreneurship education in higher education specifically, but if possible, beyond that. Well, and who to best do that with than a consortium team, which was extremely helped by a pool of high-level experts that did provide us key expertise at important points throughout the study and the project, among which were notably Norris Kruger and Andy Penaluna, as well as some others, and I cannot thank them enough for what they've done. As I said already, they brought with them a large, almost army of extremely smart people who have been teaching entrepreneurship education and who really want to make a difference in creating an assessment tool that would help us account for the variety in programs, the difference in geographical locations, in type of higher education, type of student, type of educator, all those things. And preferably not only be for Europe, but beyond. So we started off on that journey to find out what kind of toolkit is it that entrepreneurship educators want. And we accepted the challenge, trying to find out which entrepreneurial competences can be assessed and how. Especially, how can we assess the effect of those programs that we run? Qualitative, quantitative, so much to consider. Well, so we decided, why pick and choose when you can have it all? So we decided to design a toolkit that contains 5 different assessment areas, and they draw on existing as well as quite innovative measures. Entrepreneurial competences, those are the ones that were already mentioned by Norris and Andy, namely the Entrecom framework of 3 areas, each of which consists of 5 competences that can be divided into ideas, opportunities, resources, and interaction. Here we have them conveniently for you on a plate. Importantly also, we knew that not only competences are important, but as Andy and Norris have mentioned, it's about more than that. It's about how people feel towards and think towards entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial action. So entrepreneurial intentions and attitudes had to be included. And here we took existing measures that have been tested and validated, entrepreneurial intentions, entrepreneurial outcome expectations by Kruger himself, personal entrepreneurial attitudes, but also venture creation, self-efficacy. Aspects that we know do matter. But there's more. We also included an area that can measure or assess to what extent students have developed an enterprising mindset and behavior. Here also different scales available, which are all very much tested and validated, including entrepreneurial passion, which is a rather new one. The 4th one is quite different from the rest. It is not quantitative measures that the others consist of, but this one contains vignettes, which are short business cases that basically describe a situation to a student of an entrepreneurial team, of an entrepreneur who is confronted with a challenge, and the students is asked, what would you do next? They can choose from 5 possible strategies, and they are asked to rank those strategies from 1 to 5, indicating their preference by ranking them. We will see in one of the next slides how that looks like. But also, as Andy and Norris importantly said, it's not about what you teach, but also how you teach it. Great educators make a difference between they use great pedagogies or they can bring it across in a great way. So we also included an area with which educators can assess how their students think about the education engagement that was given to them. For example, if they were working in team-based or project-based challenges together, which is very much applied learning, which contributes a lot to entrepreneurial mindset development as well, and competence, of course. Entrepreneurial educators, to what extent do their educators have experience setting up their own business or bring in guest speakers that have? The educational approach, one other measure to find out about this. Educators can use the EPIC toolkit to pick and choose from those 5 assessment areas, and they can pick one, several, or all of them. It's really up to them. It's extremely custom made. And then they can send the link to their student, but wait, that is not all. There is more, as we knew that if we include all these levels in a questionnaire and we want to have a robust tool, remember that Norris Kruger said it's really important to have robustness, then we need to think about also giving educators the opportunity to go more in depth within one of those assessment areas. So in 4 of the 5 assessment areas, those that contain quantitative measures, the educators can choose to go for low, moderate, or high focus level of that assessment area, which correspond to 1, 2, or 3 stars. Now, adding more stars means that more items to that assessment area are added in the questionnaire. And as good scientists, we know that will yield a higher robustness of the survey outcomes in terms of validity and reliability of the answers. However, also make the questionnaire longer. So this is something that educator needs to assess for themselves what they would like to administer to their students. EPIC is freely available via aheinnovate.eu. And this is how it looks like. You just basically need to go to resources, and then you do need to sign in, which is free of charge, only costs 30 seconds. And the greatest thing is you do not need a complicated password. Just register 30 seconds, and then you get to pick and choose your assessment questionnaire. So here we have the different areas. You can see here the stars that you can click for entrepreneurial intentions and attitudes, for example, 1 star, and then for mindset and behaviors, 3 stars. So that would increase the focus level. And we can see also here the area entrepreneurial strategies. As I said, those are vignettes. Here we see one of the business cases, and then students will be asked to sort by dragging and dropping the different strategies they can use. Educators can see the number of statements and the time it will take to complete the students to that questionnaire. And also if the current status of each questionnaire is open, because an educator might have various courses, might have designed various questionnaires, so they can keep easily track of in their dashboard, which I will show in a second. The educator conveniently gets a link that they can share with the students, or even other educators to share further. And here in that dashboard, in my course assessments, this is what can be seen, the outcomes, the overview of the results of the surveys. They are aggregated. Students do receive their results individually. So there's a real incentive for students to participate in the survey because they immediately get the results, which is quite unique still, I think. And the teachers will get aggregated scores. So we safeguard the anonymous answers of students, and that the teachers cannot check out who was the worst student, which of course we don't ever. As this is a reciprocal instrument, meaning that students will be assessing themselves, their perception of how they did before, scored before the class and after, for the quantitative measures, that is. You will see the before score, the after score, and of course the delta, the difference. So a teacher can quickly at a glance see where there's lots of differences, possibly even negative differences. But it's quite easy to follow. In the section or the area of entrepreneurial strategies, of course, it's not a quantitative measure, so we cannot have a before and after score. So what the teacher actually sees is which strategy the students would use more. This is particularly interesting for those that teach effectuation, which is a common approach these days for used in the lean startup, for example. And it's a great way to check if students actually will use this strategy more likely or most likely in comparison to the others. So this is the EPIC tool, and you can get involved. Of course, the question is, why would you want to do this? Well, not only because you can design your own custom-made self-assessment questionnaire, or even let your students do it. I just did it the other day together with my students. We picked the assessment areas, we picked the intensity, the depth of the assessment of each area, and they loved it because they're part of it and they get their answers immediately. But also it gives you a quick and easy overview of the impact of your entrepreneurship education in such an easy way. You don't have to do all the hassle of the back office. You just log into H Innovate and there are all your assessments, or the monitoring that you did throughout the years. So having said that, of course, that's the self-assessment of the student, but we do have some more questions and I will hand over to Norris Kruger.
I did it again, babbling without unmuting. Gabby, thank you for this. This is the power of having the students involved is really important. It might even be interesting to what questions did you pick? What questions would they pick? What questions did the alumni pick? That itself might be very interesting because different audiences you ask which of the areas are more important. Some groups are mostly skills. Some groups will want just mindset. Some will be interested in behaviors and so forth. There's a way to do it as a pre-post. You could it's going to be a little tricky, but there's a way that you can deploy that. And yes, you could even go get us a control group. But these questions are really important. Is who evaluates your teaching is not always the obvious answer. And it kind of begs the question of who ought to be evaluating your teaching. Who do you want your alumni? If there's a way to do that, might be hard 5 years out, but what do your alumni think? That who is doing the evaluating and how it's being done? The bubble sheets where you rate on each question 1 to 5 the instructor, or it's online. It can be very can be annoying to the students and not necessarily very, very powerful. But I think even more, and a related question is, and this is something Andy has really been pushing for, is okay, who's out there supporting you as a teacher? And it's not just necessarily internally, but externally. Who is helping you to be an educator and to be better at that? And that's a hard question to ask because it's hard not to think of, again, who ought to be doing that. The Google Doc there is, we're giving it to you again. Again, you'd like to, Gabby, can you click on that? Is there a way to open that up? No? Okay. Let's go to the next slide then. Next slide. Anyway, on the doc is also, we're asking you these 3 questions. That would you like to start planning your own assessment plan? Would you like to be part of a global research project on this? We've had a lot of interest at a prior conference, people wanting to get engaged in this. It's not only good for your students, you could actually get published. And frankly, there is this incredible fast-growing community of practice around that is just, people are doing some staggering things that I cannot recommend more. They're not the usual suspects in the entrepreneurship education world of academia, but they're worth following. Next slide. And this is just a sampling of them, but these are some of these names you will know, like Margarita with Entrecomp, Martin Lacaeus, you've heard of. We've mentioned several of these people. This includes Andy's adult supervision, Catherine Penaluna. These sorts of people, follow them on Twitter, follow them on Facebook, follow them on LinkedIn. you will gain a lot. These are the people we learn from and will continue to learn from, and so should you. Next slide. We got a ton of links here. You're going to get a copy of the slides later. Ton of slides here of just amazing resources from that we've collected. Next slide. Still more. I particularly in the intrinsic effort down in Austria has been doing incredible webinars. I thought I did a really good one. I thought I was really good, and then I saw Andy's and went, oh crap. But there's a lot of just people speaking openly and honestly about what it really takes to go forward, because a lot of this stuff is going to be controversial, and it's going to get crazy if, for instance, in my country, if they start demanding a radical, serious assessment of what we're doing. Next slide. Anyway, shameless self-promotion, but we want you to connect with us, connect with us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and so on. It's just tremendous stuff that's it's out there that people are sharing on a daily basis. And dirty little secret, I know it sounds weird to say we having intelligent arguments on Twitter or on Facebook, but it is the nature of social media allows for an incredibly rich discussion, because your friends see this. And the day we were arguing about entrepreneurship education, and an honest to God kindergarten teacher from New Zealand chimed in and said, "You guys aren't as dumb as you look." Made my day, made my week. So do we have one more slide, Gabby? No more slides. It means we have to stop. But guys, this has been one of the great. I mean, it's this is one of the things that get me up in the morning whistling, much to the annoyance of my neighbors. There's some great stuff happening, and you have fallen in Tal Cotton connecting here with Andy and Gabi. They're two of my favorite people in the universe, and I don't think either of them have any idea how much I learn from them and how much I borrow from them on a daily basis. On Andy, wave at the crowd. By the way, you notice from those pictures before, we all look better now than those big pictures. Gabi's picture at the front, she looked kind of terrified. Now she's just terrified that this conversation has to end. Please, can you back up to the link with the Google form? Gabi, can you? Okay, one last chance. I want you to jump on. If you have any problem, email me. I will, and we're going to put this link, everything out on social media. ICSB, thank you. That their faith in this assessment project has been staggering. And please stay in touch. Gabi, wave at the camera. From the Netherlands, Andy from Wales. I did have, I keep thinking I need to move to Wales. It's amazing. But Andy, let's close with the thing you posted about the playground. Can you do that?
Yeah, I don't have the image there, but again, this was picked up 2 days ago. We've had a whole school, Davin School, undertake the Entrecomp Edu project. So every teacher in the schools now had that training. And a bystander noticed out in the playground, what were they playing? They're playing entrepreneurship in the playground. What a wonderful way to end the discussion.
Yeah, I think we can die now. The good guys have won. But play entrepreneur. I would never have thought that as a kid. Andy, that's just staggering. And before that, he shared, I think is at the same school where there's a 3-year-old who has a profitable business.
Sorry, no, that was another school, Norris. Remember,
but they were were they Welsh?
Every school in Wales has to have an entrepreneurship champion, and they have to be a professional educator.
I think we're going to end now before it gets, you don't want to see me crying and weeping in envy. Well done, audience. Please stay in touch. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.